Welcome, listeners, to episode 29 of Future Secured, and today we've picked a really interesting topic, the fight to professionalise cybersecurity. Now, just before we dive in, Jason and I at Murrell Group, we're super dedicated to bringing all of these important conversations out of the back room and into the public, and I've got a favour to ask you. If you could just hit like, subscribe, jump over to Murrell Group and follow our page, that's going to help us get these stories out into your audiences, and together we can really reach a lot of people. Okay, so to today's episode. The cybersecurity industry, as we know, is at a turning point. The push to professionalise the field, establish clear standards and accountability and accreditation is gaining traction, but we've also seen it sparking fierce resistance. Some argue it's essential to build trust and credibility. Others claim it's unnecessary gatekeeping. So, for his second visit onto Future Secured, we have Tony Vizza, who's the founding and managing partner of Novera, and he's going to help us break down this high-stakes conversation. Tony has a background in cybersecurity leadership and industry advocacy, and he's been at the forefront of efforts to establish a professionalisation framework. I remember chatting with you when we were at Cyber, when you guys were setting out on this journey. So this isn't something that's been happening overnight. So thank you so much for joining us, Tony. Thank you, as always, for joining me, Jason, as my co-host. And Jason, over to you for the first question.
The first question. Well, and you've done an inflammatory word right off the top there, Tommy. Professionalisation. That seems to be like a red rag to a bull. It's almost like the slip, slop, and slap of cyber that we've been trying to come up. You know, what's a word that doesn't seem to instill so much fear and division in the market? I mean, it is a small group that probably have a vent against the professionalisation of the industry, but something has to happen, and often you'll hear from the people complaining there's not an alternative. It's not here is an alternative. We don't like what you're doing, and here's what we would suggest. It's just shit canning for the sake of shit canning. So I'll sort of just say that off the top, and I don't think this will be inflammatory or cause any issue at all. This podcast, I think, it will be. It's going to stir some people up, but the fact is that when we did and looked at this piece of work, and Tony and Jill, I remember in the original part when we sort of looked at, and we'll probably touch on the white paper, I'm sure, and everything like that, there is a lot of work from a lot of different people from a lot of different areas. It's not just a couple of people or a few people that are just trying to push an agenda. As I say, I don't have a horse in the race. I'm not doing this to benefit myself in a financial sense or any other way, which is often what's sort of pushed there. And Tony or myself have never taken a red cent out of doing any of this sort of stuff. So like most of the work that is done, whether it be through ACN or doing this, and unlike other people, I'm not doing this to get financial gain. And I will say that straight off the top. There is not 1 cent that I'll make off it probably ever, and that's not the point of it. It's actually quite the reverse, is to how do we make this an approachable way to get more professionals, diverse range of professionals into the industry at that front end that can have the right skills and get into the market as quickly as possible with the right skill set and be mentored in on a nice clean pathway. So that's what we want to talk about today, and see how we go.
And Jason, I completely sympathise with a lot of what you're saying in terms of your, put it bluntly, a bit of frustration. Let me maybe explain for people who may not know how I got involved in all of this, and sometimes I wonder why do I even bother, right? The reason why I got involved in all of this was because a number of years ago, I was part of a group of people who was asked by the UK government to come up with a professionalisation scheme, and at the time, spent a significant amount of research effort, energy, effectively wrote a thesis on the merits of professionalisation, and also looked at some of the counter-arguments around why you may not want to do professionalisation. Now, the fact of the matter is that, particularly in a UK context, the research showed rather convincingly that setting up a professionalisation scheme would be of interest and of benefit to the UK economy. And the UK government jumped on that, set up a body called the UK Cybersecurity Council, and have subsequently set up a pilot professionalisation scheme with the intent of making it a proper professionalisation scheme. Now, that professionalisation scheme in the UK is very much aligned to how the accountants and the engineers in the UK do things. Using a chartered model where you can attain one of three different designations, you in cybersecurity can do the same thing. Now, as a result of the work that I did there, it was seen by people within government here that I could potentially assist and develop something very, very similar for the Australian market. And of course, being aware of the research, being aware of where things were going, it made a lot of sense to come up with an idea. And the idea was the white paper, Jason, that you've alluded to in your opening comments, that basically said, look, there's all this work happening overseas. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. We don't need to go off and create a whole new set of certifications or a whole new scheme altogether. We can come up with a scheme that recognises what's currently out there and accredits people for the purposes of accountability, for the purposes of instilling confidence in industry and with employers and with clients and customers who can look at someone and go, okay, yeah, look, I know I'm hiring someone, or I know someone who I'm engaging or employing to serve our cybersecurity purposes to protect us, actually has a baseline level of knowledge. So this was where all of this sort of came out to being. And I can tell you the vitriol that I have experienced has been absolutely phenomenal. I have literally been threatened with being shot, right? Which is insane. And I'll come to that because there's actually a really good point around professionalisation and some of the threats that have happened. All with the intention, and again, to your point, Jason, I've got absolutely no commercial interest whatsoever in seeing this. I really am interested in one and one thing only, is protecting people. That is what I do. And the best way to protect people is arm the protectors with the right knowledge and skills. And that's where I thought a professionalisation scheme would come in handy. We are where we are today, and it's an interesting discussion. I've seen a lot of the conversations. I've had to unfortunately block people on social media who have, rather than, to your point, said, look, you know what, Tony, we like what you've done, or we don't like what you've done. This is how we think we could do it better, or here's some suggestions on how to do that. Now, I've always been open to those ideas. I think it's really important that is open to those sorts of improvement ideas. But it's never come to that. Very often some of these criticisms are purely at, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? You've got what's the one that I've heard? Basically, I'm doing the bidding of all the certification bodies, all this other nonsense.
Yeah. Yep.
To the point that you just wonder why the hostility. Why? It just doesn't make sense to me. Like I just find it quite interesting. But I'm sure we'll discover that during the podcast today. We'll talk a bit about it.
Well, yeah. People are just resistant to change, I think. We do like things the same way. My 21-year-old son is in third year of engineering. So essentially he's learning the baseline, the core knowledge, and who knows where he's going to go. There's the idea he wants to be on subs or something like that, whether we have them or not. But that is so important to the engineering industry. We shared a clip not long ago from the first time you were on where, you were talking about doctors, and that's another great example how there is this common body of knowledge. The way that our body works, you need to understand that, and then you can go on and do your specialization. So let's kind of jump forward and paint for the listeners what is a destination postcard. So why does cyber need to professionalize, and what does it actually mean to be a cybersecurity professional versus someone who works in cyber?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'll use the analogy from the accounting industry. Anyone can be a bookkeeper. You, I, or anyone else can do our sums for our businesses and calculate profits and losses and all that sort of stuff there. But in the accounting profession, you need to be a chartered accountant or a CPA in order to do things like auditing, in order to do things like auditing of books on publicly listed companies, right? So it's not stopping. The idea behind what we've been talking about when it comes to professional is not to stop people getting into the industry or not to stop people from even working in the industry, but it's to have a scheme that says, okay, I have achieved a level of recognition that says that I can now call myself a professional in this space. Right? An analogy that I can also use going back to the trades, I know that my dad used to be a house painter, painted for all of his life. Right? He was a licensed painter. Right? Now, anyone can go to Bunnings, buy a can of paint, paint their house. Anybody. We can all do it. Right? You don't need to be licensed to paint your own home. And in fact, you don't need to be licensed to paint someone else's home until you get to a certain value, right? And then you have to provide a contract, and you have to have the necessary insurances and licenses. The due diligence comes down to the person who's actually asking for the person to come in and paint the house, right? So that creates a level of accountability in that sector. Because if you engage a painter who doesn't know what they're doing, and after 6 months all your paint's peeling, you can call the Master Painters Association, or you can call your consumer body in your state or nationally and say, look, I've got an issue. This person came in, has taken a good chunk of my cash to paint, and now 6 months later this is peeling. This is not on, right? And you can get legal recourse as a result. In the world of cybersecurity, yes, on a contractual basis, absolutely you can, but there is nothing stopping anybody from going in and, doing the equivalent of making paint peel off a wall right after a couple of weeks. And if they run off and they do the fly-by-nighter, guess what? Companies got no recourse. They're the ones who are going to end up in court, because they're the ones who are going to have privacy claims and potential OIC claims and any other sort of level of claims, maybe even class actions. But there is no recourse. So the idea behind what we're talking about with professionalisation is there is a level of recognition for individuals in the space that says you have a level of accountability. And an individual can make a claim against you if you perform effectively malpractice. Now, we don't want people to do that. We know that this is a very complicated area in industry. So people like myself and people who've been doing this for a long time, we work out of an abundance of caution in these cases. And very often we want to make sure that businesses do maybe a little bit more than is required to protect themselves from a cybersecurity perspective. But we do it for a reason. We do it because we want to protect the business that we work in, and we want to protect the people around us. Now, often we will talk about solutions and things where there may not be budget, but at least we've done our job. At least we've said, listen, you should be doing this. And the analogy that I often use in this case, and I've had people say to me, the doctor analogy is flawed because we still have people dying of heart disease, and we still have people dying of diabetes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. My doctor tells me not to eat junk food. My doctor tells me not to eat too much sugar, right? They've done their job. Now, if I go home and, eat a whole bar of chocolate, right, that's going to hurt me, right? I'm still susceptible to suffering from all the bad things that can happen to you as a result, right? But the doctor has done their job consistent with the science. It says, if you do this, you're going to harm your health. This is the level of experience and knowledge and wisdom that we want people in the space to start imparting onto companies and people in the space. You can only do that once you have people who have done that base level of knowledge, skills, and has the experience on top of that to be able to provide that advice and support to industry.
And that's and just topping onto that too is and the other thing obviously that most people are aware of is doing the SMB 1001, through Dynamic Standards International. Again, that's to protect businesses, right? So that's to uplift the skill of MSPs and MSSPs to then deliver something in an area where it's really needed. Over 90% of small to medium-sized businesses across the world, that's the market, right? And that's the most vulnerable area. And again, helping to try and fix that problem and find a solution for that is in the mix of the SMB 1001, So what I'm trying to do here and what Tony's doing, and just to speak to the people listening, is looking for solutions to problems which sit in the market, right? Nothing gets changed and nothing gets fixed if you'll just sit back there and take fucking pot shots all the time. I'd rather just keep trying to fix things and find solutions to things. And that's from being an entrepreneur. That's what I do. I see things in the market that need help, need fixing, and need repair, and go in there and find like-minded people to fix it. Whether it's professionalisation, whether it's startups, whatever it is, we just don't support enough in this country. And what this needs is support and people to come up with ideas and get a collective group of people around the table that can fix the problem. And I think one of the things too, Tony, they fear about is that I haven't done. There's a grandfathering clause that we talked about in our first piece of work. If you've already got requisite skill, that'll get recognised. This is for from this day forward, right? So don't fear that just because you haven't done stuff before, you don't get there. There's obviously cybersecurity has become a new thing, right? But it's a thing now. And your skills from previously will be recognised. It's not like you have to go back to school and study. There is a grandfathering clause and will be in these sorts of things, right? So there are a few things I want to cover as well on this, is to just sort of set the record straight of where it sits from my perspective as well. So these are the things I just wanted to sort of get clear, because I've sat quietly like Tony and just sort of watched all this bullshit happening in the background, but it just needs to be the reasons why it's happening stated very clearly. These are the reasons why I do anything I do, is to fix things that I see are broken or that it could be done better. That's what I've always done through my whole career.
Yeah, completely, Jason. I'll completely sympathise. It is entirely disheartening when you approach things from the perspective of here is a potential solution to this problem. And paper which I developed and Jill was involved in was very much the case of here is something that I am doing based on the years of experience that I've had actually solving these problems that I feel could work. Now, I've never said that this is going to be the silver bullet, and I've never said that this is perfect. I've always said that if there are issues with what I've come up with, then feel free to raise them. And in fact, over time, I've actually evolved the model to incorporate some of the feedback, because the feedback does need it does need to be addressed, and there's often very valid feedback. Right? But to your point, it's very often the people who will come out and do exactly what you said, take those pot shots and say those things. And I mean some really nasty things. I had a clinical psychologist.
No, I've got it as well. Like, you know, and we know because we've spoken offline. Some of the stuff that comes through and is very targeted. You know, play the ball, not the person, right? It's very. Let's talk about that, right? I don't care what you think about me as a person or what you think my motives are. I can tell you there is. So for Tony and I, there is no money in this. We're not making money in it, no matter what our involvement in this part. That's not what the driver is in this thing, right? I think people just need to get that clear through their skull. It's a bigger purpose than outside of what sits within the people here and the people that have been involved previously. Everyone that worked on that first piece of work, they all volunteered their time to do it. There wasn't anyone got paid directly for that, you know. So yeah, it's it's weird.
And Jason, it was interesting because I was sent across a social media post that was written by an individual in the form of an expose about my affiliations and this and that, and it was written in this really sort of interesting language. Now, if this individual had picked up the white paper and had gone to the second last page of the white paper, all that expose, so-called expose information, was all listed there clear as crystal. And I make absolutely no apologies or hide in any way the fact that I'm a member of numerous industry bodies. Right? I have no problem saying that. It's all listed there. Right? It was particularly interesting during that phase, and this was prior to me having to block a number of people online. A dear friend of mine who I've known since we were literally 5 years old, who's a clinical psychologist, said to me, having read a lot of these comments, said, look, from what I can see, this is precisely the evidence that you need to indicate that you need a professional standard scheme in your industry, because this would not be tolerated in our space. This would not happen. People calling people to be shot and people being ripped down with innuendo and lies would not be tolerated, right? And to your point around the criticisms, in all instances where people said to me, no, Tony, I think this white paper is a load of crap, I said, all right, that's fine. Your prerogative and you can think that. But tell me how and why. Explain to me where I've gotten it wrong, or explain to me where you think it can be improved, or explain to me where you think I'm completely incorrect and should be pulled up. And in no instance has anyone ever actually said, well, I've got a problem with this, or I've got a problem with this, or I don't like the fact that you've got two pathways into cybersecurity and there's a grandfathering clause. None of that. It's just a
I don't think most people read it. I think they see the word professionalisation, they read it. And to the point too, Tony, just on the insurance part. So with SMB 1001, just as an example, and this word professionalisation will help as well. If you get to silver standard, you qualify for cyber insurance.
Yep.
If you attest to being at silver standard in SMB 1001, insurance companies will insure you, right? Now, you sort of said off the top, and I just wanted to pick that up as well, that, as you said about the painting example and these other things, and we talk about doctors and all that sort of stuff, if you have these things in place and some form of standard in place for what determines a professional in the cyber sphere, then you're more likely to get insurance as a professional yourself, but also you'll be able to make sure your clients are covered as well. And if that's important to you, then that's obviously a good reason to go do something, right? So, these things are there just to help, because businesses are fucking lost. And I'm using SMB 1001 because it's in market at the moment. It's been ratified by so many, including Singapore government and others that are participating in that, the CMMC on the steering committee, all that sort of stuff. It's an international standard now, right? It started from Australia. But this is something that Australia can lead. We should be leading more pieces of work. I know it started in the UK and we sort of leaned on them in that first part, but we want something that can be recognised. And people go, oh, yeah, but it's only going to be in Australia. What's that going to count for? Well, let's lead the way and make it international, like we did with Dynamic Standards International, which started as an Australian standard for SMB 1001. Why do we have to always look for Big Brother to do something before we do something? Let's lead, right? Let's not be followers all the time. That's the other thing that really frustrates me in Australia. It's like, oh, we can't do it because no one else is doing it. Well, yes, we can. You know, how did Wi-Fi get invented? Because Australians did it. Google Maps, Australians did it. The cochlear implant, Australians did it. But where they all get commercialized? Offshore, right? You know, so let's look at what we can do and what we can lead, and stop being such, oh well, we have to wait till someone else does it. What's it going to count if America doesn't do it, or if, you know, the UK doesn't do it? So yeah, grow up a bit.
Yeah, it's and Jason, it's interesting because I had the great fortune when I did my executive MBA of having spent time in Silicon Valley and studied at Stanford Uni as part of it, very much exposed to that startup space, and it was a massive eye opener. And in fact, the reason why I went down very clearly a path of working within the cybersecurity space was as a direct result of my time there. Because prior to that, I was much involved in IT. Cybersecurity was always a function of what I was doing. But at the time, having gone there, having spent time there, and having seen some of the things that was taking place there, it was genuinely exciting. And I came back and I said, like, this is an area that change can be effected. We can prevent these things from happening. Now, that was 15 years ago, right? We know, you and I both know, and in fact, our audience will probably know, we've had instance upon instance upon instance of cyber breach. We've had one over the last week or so in regards to highly sensitive medical information that's been lost. This is not a problem that has been solved, and this is not a problem that is being solved at the moment, right? We keep seeing this can get kicked down the road. Yes, we see that legislation is trying to address some of these things. We know that the Cybersecurity Act was passed last year. We know that the Privacy Act was updated last year. However, we keep seeing this problem come up, right? And the problem is only going to get worse until someone actually says, you know what, enough is enough. We need to do something about it, right? And we know collectively on this call that cybersecurity is difficult. It's difficult even for people who are professionals in the space. I've set up a startup, as you talked about a little bit earlier, and I can tell you that even in setting up my own infrastructure for my own quite small business, right, as an industry professional who's done this for a long time, it takes a lot of effort and takes a lot of work. And for me, it diverts me from what I'm trying to do, which is actual work and actually make differences out there, right, for companies and for people, right? Now, if it's difficult for me to do as someone who's done this literally since I've been 8 years of age, right? Imagine you're a small business in any other sector. You don't have an iota of interest in IT. You use it because you have to use it, right? How are you going to secure your information, which is, of course, becoming more and more prevalent every single day? It's becoming more and more sensitive. A lot of organisations are collecting information that is sensitive by nature, and they don't protect it properly. And they rely on someone else, some sort of provider, to do that for them. And that individual has the gift of the gab, has absolutely zero accreditation or actual formal knowledge or even experience in the space, and completely mess it up. Who is responsible? And this is what professionalisation is one of the key areas that we're trying to address is. We want to have people have confidence in the people that work in this space. That's it. That's all it comes down to, is it comes down to confidence. And in fact, one of the things that is often thrown in my direction and is often labelled, particularly by people who are very against professionalisation, is the argument that if we professionalise, we're going to further cause issues around gender equality, and we're going to disenfranchise more women out of this industry. Are you kidding me? We in this industry today have somewhere between 10 to 25% of people in this industry are women, right? Now, compare it to a highly professionalised industry such as law, where it's 55% women, right? Now, they still have their problems, don't get me wrong, because if you look at judges, you look at barristers, and you look at senior lawyers, there is still a disparity there. There is still a pay gap there that exists in that industry. But in terms of that equality, in terms of people coming into the industry, because it's professionalised, there's no one doubting that a female lawyer has the same knowledge, skills, experience, and abilities as a male lawyer. You can't question that anymore, because they've both got the same bit of paper, right, that says you're accredited. So there's no question that anymore. We don't have that. And I can tell you that women, particularly in this space, are leaving. Every single study that you see out there says they'll do 3 years, and then they've had enough of bullying, they've had enough of harassment, they've had enough of all of the that goes on, and they leave the industry. They walk away. Now, if we have a professionalisation scheme that says you are as capable and as equivalent in every single way, shape, or form as this guy over here, How is that in any conceivable way a barrier to entry in this space? You're
Yeah,
kidding
have
me.
the reverse effect. Have the reverse. And it's like
Thank you.
in more women, doctors and surgeons are graduating than men, right?
Mm.
Yeah,
That's fact. So
yeah,
yeah, it opens it up, right? It makes it an even playing field, and you're not focused on the avatar of the person, it's the skills of the person that they have. So
correct.
that actually takes that out of the equation.
I've got a really interesting observation, and listeners, I think you will have heard the same thing. Is you've got two people here that are really focused on change and actually trying to show a better way, and they get feedback and build a community on the way. Now it's easy to tear them down, and one of the things that I've just noticed listening to them is that they're not completely on the back foot, but there's an element of that. And personally, I'd rather you two out there being charging hard and actually, finding solutions and building that conversation. And, opinions are like arseholes. We've all got them. And
Mm.
if, one of the things I
Some people
think we
have
all
two.
have to do, yep, we have to do is we've got to start tuning out the people, to your point, Tony and Jason, that are negative without providing context, without actually reading a white paper, without taking the time. And social media allows you to do that in today's world. And
Mm.
also, you've just got to kind of I think we need to think these voices out there are playing a disproportionately sized part of the conversation. And we've seen that in federal politics when you have an extreme right or left in control in parliament. And that single voice shapes policy that, they're getting very special attention, but it doesn't help the rest of the country. And this is about helping everyone. I love that gender diversity part. So, how about we kind of jump forward now and go to what are those kind of, what's a destination postcard, as I love to say, in a year or two, what could it look like for our industry? We're heading towards that gender equality potentially, or we're at least starting to make some impact on those numbers. But I think the key thing, and back to where you started, Tony, is that if I get an electrician out to my house, I know that they're certified and they're going to do the right job. So when I hire a cybersecurity professional, let's say they're in the SOC and they're working there, yeah, I want to know they can do the job and they've got the right skills and that they have the common knowledge that they need to make specialists. So look, that's just me having a bit of a vent as well. But so what does good look like if we get this right over the next couple of years?
Yeah, and again, this is a really good question because it's very hard to paint an ideal picture. I think that good, it will probably take longer than a couple of years. I think we're
Mm.
probably on the path, and this is part of the reason why the government did put out in their 2030 strategy an idea that we professionalise the industry. So that was actually within the 2023-2030 strategy that we look at that, right? So again, going back to some of the criticism from people who are saying that Jason and I and others in this space are pushing a particular agenda. Actually, we are, because the strategy from the federal government says we're going to do this, right? So let's
Mm.
be clear on that first aspect, right? Now, where are we going to look at in terms of ideal? Ideal is moving the needle in terms of differing diversity and in terms of, I wouldn't even say we have an issue in terms of the number of people in cybersecurity. I actually think we have an issue with the quality of people in cybersecurity. And when I say
Mm.
quality, we're not talking about individual A and individual B of differing quality, right? I've always said that if you are a cybersecurity professional, regardless of what area that you work in the field, and again, cybersecurity is like medicine, you can be in many different areas, right? You should have a basic level of understanding of key concepts of cybersecurity. One of the things that I often hear is I see things online that say, oh, you don't need to worry about having IT knowledge of being cybersecurity. That is insanity. If you don't know how IT operates, you're not going to be able to secure IT systems. It's as simple as that, right? Now, does it mean that you need to know how to program at a code level every single type of application? No, you don't. But you need to understand how applications work and the function of
Mm.
source code and why it's important to protect it and the importance of things like encryption within applications and that high level of knowledge. You need to have that. Now, if you are a penetration tester and you're really good at pen testing, right, you still need to understand how a network operates, because if you don't, how are you going to be an effective pen tester? You're not going to be able to do that. That's the argument that I've been making for time immemorial almost, to say that we need that base level of knowledge across all different job functions of cybersecurity, right? And that each job has its own value, right? Each job does have its own merit And there are going to be areas that you're going to have to get the right level of skills to be able to understand and create a strategy for an organisation to protect themselves. You're not going to get a pen tester come up with an information security management strategy, because that's going to be doomed to fail, right? But equally, if you're going to need to do a job as a pen tester, you won't get the CISO to do that, because there's going to be infinitely better people who are infinitely more skilled at being able to perform that level of testing, because the CISO's been there 20 years and is probably looking at things much more strategically. It doesn't make them less capable. In fact, it makes them more capable, because they can see all of these jobs at a strategic level, and they can rely on the people that have the right skill set, right? But until we get away from this idea that if you're not a highly technical cybersecurity person who can, break code and do things, you're not really in cybersecurity. It's insanity, right? It's absolute insanity. And some of the voices that we hear, who are the ones who are actually performing most of the criticism, are actually these people who are highly technical. I have huge regard for them as technical people and capable technical people, but they simply don't get the idea that their job is not the only job in the space. Their job is not cybersecurity. Their job is one of many in cybersecurity, and it's okay, and we should be okay with that conversation. To say, guess what? You can be a GP, you can be a neurosurgeon, you can be a cancer specialist, oncologist. You're in medicine, and each of these people perform very specialised and very critical functions, right? But if the GP goes in and does surgery, on a brain tumour, they're probably going to kill the patient, right? It doesn't make them a bad GP. It just doesn't make them qualified for what they're doing. So this is what we're talking about, and understanding and respecting and appreciating that is really critical.
Yeah, and I think also I've come out of years ago. I was in financial planning, so when I did financial planning, you could do, and I did, manage funds, superannuation, insurance. You had the full gamut of stuff that you could do. It got to the point when slabs of superannuation reform was coming out, and when insurance started to broad range, and managed funds, became so many different wholesale funds and stuff like that, that you really have to choose where you want to specialize. And so I doubled down sort of on the financial part, or on the fund side. But I know people that then just did superannuation specialists as a financial planner. You need to really know, and it's such a broad church in cybersecurity too. You really do need to sort of pick. It's good to know and have general knowledge, but you also want to really drill down on an area of expertise. And you mentioned pen testers, and could be GRC, like governance, risk and compliance professional or whatever. But you still need to know the broad range, but then you really want to, as an expert, double down, or really drill down on an area of expertise. And we need that in cyber. Rather than just having a lot of generalists or people who are just too specialists, you need to have a broad church of knowledge, but also really specialised. And that's what this will help uncover. And also it's going to make it easier when people change jobs, because, you'll have an avatar, you'll have someone who might be in GRC, and they'll say, you've worked in GRC and financial services, you're au fait with these, 2, 3, 4, or whatever bodies of work you've used in GRC, but you might be looking for a career change or to upgrade that. So you almost might be a 74% ranking in GRC as a professional, but you want to step it up to the next level. What do I need to study, or what do I need to do to get to that next level, so that I can improve my skill set, to become better and sort of climb that ladder? It's going to help from an employment point of view. It's going to help from many fronts and many facets, but also for the individual themselves to choose what their pathway is or what their next step is, all the way back into school. People can, at year 10, with a school counsellor, say, you've got a great aptitude for law or accounting, but also you could do GRC, like governance, risk and compliance. That could be something you could explore. So let's look at your year 11, 12 subjects and see what that might look like as a pathway and what you need to do. So it's a lot more broad ranging, and I agree with Tony. It's going to take a couple of years, Tom, just to go back to your original question. This is not an overnight solution, and 1.9 million in this next piece of work is bugger all, right? I know that sounds like a big quantum of money, but it's not going to go very far, right? It's going to cover the next stage of work, but it's not going to complete this piece of work. And as I said, and going back to what we said at the start, it's about getting the right people around the table that are not in it for anything else other than how do we help get this together. And it's going to be, bodies from insurance and all different areas that are actually going to put their input in there to bring it together. So it's not just going to be a few individuals. And it is going to have different voices around the table that are actually all looking at it from different aspects to come to a conclusion of what that looks like, right? So I know that there's certain people getting targeted, but again, I just want to reiterate that it is a broader church, and it's not just industry bodies, that are going to sit around the table. It's going to be people, as Tony and I, that don't have a horse directly in the race. They're actually looking for assisting the market and going forward. So as Tony said, in the 2030 strategy, it has it in there. This piece of work is going to go well beyond that. and will keep forming and changing as it goes along. It's going to have to, because the market in cyber does. When we think about things like AI or machine learning, what that's done, and we think about quantum on the horizon, by the time this work gets in, these sorts of things are going to be prevalent, and it's going to change what a professional looks like and what they're going to have to deal with. So it's a moving feast. Unlike we talked about accounting or medical, like accounting, the Dutch merchants back in the 1500s set up a certain system which is still running today, right? It changes because we bring Xero into the equation, or QuickBooks or online accounting. But outside of that, as a profession, it hasn't changed that greatly. But cybersecurity is something which is changing on a regular basis and quite quickly. And we need something that can be nimble enough to keep up with that. And as we've done with the SMB 1001, that gets readjusted on a yearly basis based around what's happening in the market and feedback that we get, and steering committees and all those sorts of things to help change and mold that to make sure it's suitable and fit for purpose. And this would do the same thing.
And I'll add to that, Tom, just to your question, how long is this going to take? This is going to take a couple of generations, to be absolutely honest. If we look at the perspective of gender equality and diversity, the legal space has been doing this now for a couple of generations. It's still, you've got more women in law than men, but in terms of the higher paying jobs and in terms of the seniority, it's still, you look at the High Court, for example, right? It's from memory, it's 5 and 2 from memory. I should know this, but you get the idea, right? We still have that imbalance there. So I think in terms of genuine outcomes for companies and strengthening cyber resilience as a whole, I think it will take a few years before we get there. And that feeds into, to Jason's point, the SMB 1001. You've got ISO 27001, which of course has been updated. You've got ISO 42001 for AI systems that's only quite new, that a lot of organisations haven't even started considering yet, right? So this is going to be something that will take time, right? But one of the graphics I remember sharing at a presentation many years ago was deaths by auto vehicle accidents. So this is an insurance graph that showed over the course of history, from the 1880s all the way to today, if you look at the number of road deaths per 100,000 users, it peaked in the 1950s and 60s and has been going downhill ever since, right? Now, the cars have probably gotten faster, not slower, but we know over that time that we've got better safety standards, we've got better technology, better brakes, better education around road users. The fact that we try to stop people who are drinking and then go off and drive. We've got all of that. That's brought that toll down considerably globally over the years. And I would argue that the world of cybersecurity is probably sitting at the top of that graph at the moment, if we had to sort of contrast the two, right? So in time we will see better outcomes, and in time we will see less of these things happen. However, these things did not happen by accident. They happened because of positive action. And this professionalisation piece that we talk about is an example of that. And it's not the only solution. And I think a lot of people who detract, that more mainstream people who sort of detract and say, well, what problem are we trying to solve? Well, this is going to solve, it's going to be a contributor to solving the problem. But again, and I say this one more time, it's not a silver bullet. So this, in concert with so many other pieces of really good work that are happening at the moment, will eventually contribute to that decline in these issues. But it's one of many things that we can be doing. So very often, the people who are quite reasonable in their dissent, and there are people who have approached me and said, I've seen all this stuff. I personally don't think professionalisation is a good idea, but I wanted to have a chat with you because I know you. This is what they say to me. I know you. Yeah, I've met you. You sound pretty reasonable. Like, tell me what's going on. What's all this about? And often, when I have that conversation with these people, the end of that conversation goes something along the lines of, more than often I should say, goes along the lines of, well, that sounds pretty reasonable. Actually, I haven't had a chance to read the paper. And I didn't actually realise that you've actually done this and you've allowed for 2 different pathways for people to get in, and it recognises prior knowledge, skills and experience, and it's not trying to create a certification, a brand new certification, and it's purely trying to implement a level of accountability in this industry that it doesn't have at the moment, and it probably does have. This is the feedback that I get after a one-on-one conversation. Now, as a human being, I can't have one of those at a time, right? I can't keep doing that. People ring me up constantly to have this conversation. So my suggestion would be, I would encourage you to read the white paper. I would encourage you to read any dissenting research, and a lot of people will point to things such as a report that ASA wrote a couple of years ago that said they don't support professionalisation. That white paper actually says that over half of ASA members do support professionalisation. It's actually in there. So I would suggest and I would recommend people do their own research, read what's out there, understand what this is actually all about, right? And then make your own decision rather than rely on the voice of quite high-profile people, or even rely on what I'm saying. You don't have to do that. Question things, but make your own decision, because the reality is, I personally don't think it's all that bad. I think it makes sense. And people in other industries who I've spoken about and have said to me, Tony, what's this all about? And I explain it to them, and they say, you mean your industry doesn't have this yet? Like, are you nuts? Okay, well, this is why we change it, right? Is because other industries have been doing this for many, many years, and we still don't have this. So encourage you to make your own decision.
Thank you both for joining us, and I really hope that we can spur some great conversation out of this, some challenging conversation, but people can just keep the swear words to themselves. It'd be fantastic. Thank you both.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank
Tom.
you.